Thanks to Tools Today for sponsoring this video. Alright, so I've got this cool little side table to show you guys today. It's got this modern minimal look with the dish-shaped top and the 3 splayed legs. But the coolest thing are these exposed joinery in the legs that aren't hidden underneath the tabletop. And I've had this design in my head for quite a while, and I thought it was going to be pretty simple to build, but I quickly found out that these angled bridle joints were nothing like the ones I made before. So I had to figure out how to cut these as I was building it, which became pretty challenging but also quite fun. So yeah, let's get right into it. Alright guys, so the first thing I'm going to do is break down this lumber, and this project isn't big, so it doesn't require a lot of material, but if we take a look at the model here, you can see that there will be angles and exposed joinery, which I'm still not sure how I'm going to cut yet, so I am definitely making some extra pieces for this project. I'm going to have plans available on my website in both metric and imperial, and it's also going to include the full CAD model as well as all of my CNC settings. So if you're interested to build this and support my channel, be sure to head over there and pick that up. Other than that, let's get these guys milled up, and then we'll glue up the panel to make the top. Hey, editing Alex here. So I was going to explain how to set things up in Fusion 360 to carve the top, but the video just got way too long. So what I'm going to do is upload a separate video in about a week or two where I can just focus on that and not worry about the length of the video. So for now, let's just skip all of that and jump right into carving the top. Alright, so the top came out looking absolutely gorgeous, but what I think is really going to make this table stand out are these legs, which at first looks like the regular angled bridle joints I've done in my past videos, but this one's actually a little bit trickier because the tenon is cut into the leg, which has these 2 different angles on either side, and that makes it difficult to ensure that the angle of this cut matches on both sides of this tenon. And of course I can use a bevel gauge to help improve that accuracy, but I think the better way to do this is first cut the 5-degree angles on both ends so that I can measure where the tenon needs to be, and then cut those out before I cut the final taper on the inside of this leg. And that way the reference surfaces for cutting this tenon will be parallel, and this is going to help to reduce some of those potential problems that we might run into. So yeah, let's get some legs cut. Okay, so we are 90% of the way there. There's just a couple more things that we need to do. And the first is that we need to cut off this corner right here. And the reason is, if we make this corner perfectly vertical to the ground, then we can avoid cutting an angled mortise in the stretcher. And the other thing we want to do is to remove this material from this top corner. It's all going to be a little bit tricky, but I think the easiest way to do both is to somehow hold up the piece vertically like this so that we can make these cuts at the table saw this way. And it turns out that this is really easy to do, especially if you have a 10-inch jig like this one. But if you don't, I have a video on how I made this one, and I really suggest you check it out because this thing gets a lot of use in my builds. And we'll be using it again later to cut the mortise in the stretcher. But anyway, the first thing I want to make is a piece that sits between the leg and the tapering jig to help support the leg along this entire edge, so it doesn't want to rock from side to side like this. So what I did was I lined up the top edge of the leg to an edge on a piece of MDF and then traced the outer edge of that leg onto it and made the cut using a tapering jig. And the length of this wedge doesn't need to take the entire length of the leg. The main job of this part is really to just sit here and become a reference surface for the leg to sit against. But the next piece I make is actually going to be used for holding the leg in place in this direction. And for this, what I did was I measured the distance from the end of the leg to the end of the wedge, which came out to be 130 millimeters for me. And I ripped a rectangular piece equal to that width. Once again, this really doesn't need to be this wide because all we really need is a good clamping surface. But having it extend all the way to the end here will provide a backing surface to prevent blowout through the back. So yeah, if you have the material, might as well. But once we have both of these pieces, we're going to cut one more board that's the same height as these two, and it's long enough to be clamped to the 10-inch jig. And then I'm going to put these three pieces together with some glue and brad nails, and then clamp this whole assembly to my 10-inch jig. And finally, I can clamp the leg to this jig, line it up to the blade, and cut off this corner to create an edge that's perpendicular to the ground. And then I'm just going to swap out for the other legs and repeat the same process, and everything should come out looking exactly the same. So once I got these parts cut, it's time to remove this material from this top corner here. And for that, I swapped over to my dado set, and this time I lined up the tip of the blade to the shoulder of the tenon, and then lined up the leg to the edge of the blade so that I was left about 37 millimeters of material on the end. And this number doesn't have to be exact, it was just something that looked good to me. But once I had all that set up, I made 2 passes to clear out that material, and once that was done, that was pretty much the hardest part of making these legs. And the very last thing I did was cut a chamfer on the opposite corner, which I only did because I thought it would look good for transitioning up to the top of the table. So, don't worry too much about the angle of the cut. Just do whatever looks good to you, or, just leave it the way it is. But anyway, that's it for these legs, and I'm probably going to come back later and round over these edges, but for now I kind of want to leave it the way it is until after I do a dry fit to see how things look with the stretchers attached. As far as the stretchers go, I'm going to start by cutting the angles on these ends here, and each of these will be 60 degrees, which is pretty straightforward to cut at the table saw. So first I'm going to tilt the blade to 60 degrees, and then set up a stop block on my crosscut sled and make that first cut. And then I'm going to rotate the part along its length 180 degrees and make a second cut. So if I cut far enough along the length of this part, this second cut should intersect the first one right along the middle. So that's one reason why I left this part about 1 inch longer than what it really needed to be. But once that's done, I'm going to cut dominoes into these surfaces, do a dry fit to figure out how deep the mortises needs to be, and get them cut. Okay, so these fit together great, and I placed the stretchers roughly in the middle of the tabletop, and then I just used a ruler to measure from the end of the stretcher to the edge of the tabletop and bump things around until it's equal on all 3 of these parts. And finally, I clamped it all down so that things don't move around when I put the leg on the stretcher to help lay out the depth of the mortise, as well as the final length of the stretcher, which according to my model is roughly 10 millimeters or about 3/8 of an inch proud of the leg. So the order of operation for this is that we are actually going to cut these to their final length first, because otherwise this mortise here is going to be way too deep for most table saws. And in fact, even after we cut this end off, this mortise is still 74 millimeters deep, which is roughly 3 inches, which means I'm gonna have to stick with my regular 10-inch blade. But it's no big deal since the mortise itself isn't super wide. So what I'm gonna do is just take one pass and then flip this guy around to take a second pass and then come back to clear out the rest of the stuff in the middle. And the last thing we're going to do before glue up is I'm going to bevel the ends of the stretcher as well as the leg. I know in the plans I did a round over along the edges, but I'm still really partial to bevels. So I'm going to cut the bevels at the table saw for the stretchers, but these legs are tapered. So I'm going to use this 45-degree chamfer bit that I got from Tools Today over at my router table. This thing's got a bearing on it, which will allow it to just ride along the profile of the leg and just make cutting the chamfer a lot easier. So yeah, let's cut some joinery and bevels and we'll get these all finished up. So everything came together great. The joints fit perfectly, but yesterday I noticed that there's just a little bit of unevenness between the legs and the stretchers on top of the joint. So I took my block plane and flushed that up. Now it's time for glue up. Now it's gonna be a little tricky because these parts aren't square. So what I did after applying glue to the ends of the stretchers was I placed some triangular cawls with a 120-degree corner in between the stretchers to help line up the clamping force along the length of the stretchers, which worked out pretty well. Then I let it sit for about an hour or so before attaching the legs, which was pretty straightforward with just glue and clamps. And then I let it all cure overnight and then came back to cut 2 recesses with a 4-center bit along the top of each of those stretchers for some figure-8 clips to sit into in order to attach the whole assembly to the tabletop to finish up the build. Guys, I am so happy that this turned out exactly the way that I designed it, and man, am I glad I was able to figure out how to get these joints cut because it really had me scratching my head there for a moment. If you guys want to build this and also support me in what I do, be sure to head over to my website and pick up a set of plans. I would really appreciate it. And thank you guys so much for sticking to the end of the video, and be sure to comment and like, and if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. I will see you guys in the next one.